Hey everyone, Brantflex here. Wanted to do a really quick video for Limbus Company Canto 3. I'm not going to bother with adding in VOD cuts at the end. I just want to give a really quick review of my overall thoughts and kind of my feelings for Limbus Company Canto 3 after I played it through. I think Canto 3 is a pretty solid improvement over Canto 2. Again, knowing that Canto 2 is kind of the ugly duckling, I think, of the series where it's more of a light-hearted thing and like hijinks do stuff. Canto 3 was a return to like the very serious and mature vibes of the story, and I thought it did a really good job. Now, the beginning of Canto 3 was pretty straightforward, like straight line through the plot, going through the checkpoint, which was really nice to see for world building. Seeing Dawn, ironically enough, like punished for her mischievous actions was a really nice thing to see, just because obviously with the first few cantos, and like first two actions, like Dawn was kind of getting away with things a little too easily, in my opinion. So it was nice seeing like actual consequences because that makes sense within the story. And then obviously going through Sinclair's background and like the drive to his old hometown and like the interactions inside the old hometown, seeing the destruction and carnage that the Hammer and Nail faction did to his old hometown were all really impactful and really made me excited because I think I did have some minor spoilers from this Canto because I watched a friend play it a long time ago. I didn't pay too close attention, but I did know like some of the general ending bits, so I kind of figured that a lot of the excitement and a lot of the real impactful and impressionable things would happen when we finally got into Sinclair's backstory, and that ended up being true. Going into the dungeon had a lot more, I think it was a lot more flavor at least. Like it was a lot more impressionable, a lot of personality rather than Canto 2. And the moment that we got into Sinclair's backstory, it was a really interesting way of exploring trauma from the eyes of a younger, like not a young boy, but like a younger man who is trying to find his own way of being mature and, having like, I guess like essentially growing up, right? And so it was really cool. I think I did get like some light spoilers, or rather like some guidance on how to appreciate certain scenes, which did affect my interpretation of the scene itself. And obviously, again, knowing like some small details or having some very vague memories of watching a few random scenes here and there from when my friend played it did affect my overall impression of the Canto, but it still was very, very well written. I don't know if KJH, or I don't know his like full Korean name, but I don't know if KJH writes everything and edits everything himself, but it's very, very clear that his skill is very, very high when it comes to these darker and more mature and more serious undertones and stories. And when this writer has like a way to just like directly go through a lot of story beats that matter and actually have progress, the story is really strong, in my opinion. Kentetsu had a problem where like because it was trying to be more of a comedic story, in my opinion, there's a lot of things that happened that didn't make sense that weren't really explained. But in Canto 3, there's a lot of purpose. There's a lot of like we're doing this for a reason. Things are happening for a reason. We're being in this area for a good reason. There's a lot of logic and care and thought that went from place to place. And yeah, I thought it was really cool. There's a lot of hidden themes in this canto. Like, I guess it's like a much more spoiler aspect of it, but like the design and the acts and like the overall like high what's the word, like hypocriticalness of the Hammer and Nails characters was very apparent to me, which made it very cool to see their interactions and read their dialogue. Because for me, like just from the get-go, like obviously Hammer and Nail mobs are designed like these essentially like suits of metal. These are not humans, right? These are guys dressed up in raw metal, like just full metal, not even dressed in like good metal armor, right? It's rusty, it's like discolored. They're not even taking care of themselves. They're these people that say they're being human, right? Dressed in like pretty classic like Inquisitor armor of like other game aspects. But it's very obvious that they're like being hypocritical because they're trying to chase down humans. They're trying to decide what being human means when they're not really human themselves. And that's even more iterated by the only times you see their faces. Obviously, Cromer is also an Inquisitor, but her being like the main big bad and her being like the main trauma source and the main abuser of Sinclair means that she has to have a face. But like Guido and every other Inquisitor that exists, the only time you see their face is when they are being like monsterified by the corruption, right? Like when they're being corrupted or corroded or whatever the term is called, that's the only time you see any face from these people. So the only time you see their faces is when they're not no longer human. And I think it's a really interesting message, just because again it points to like the hypocriticalness of like trying to decide whether someone else deserves the right to be human. And there's a lot of commentary on that, like the idea of traditional values, like how much that matters. And I guess like it kind of goes into Sinclair's story, where Sinclair is this very lost teenage boy, and I think this is like a really good, like it's again very good, I guess like trauma based story where it's like a teenage boy who is a little different, right? I think I talked about this with my chat when I was streaming, but like Sinclair is very obviously written to be somebody who is a bit irregular from his peers, from his family, because obviously in our like our modern, I guess like our current modern society, like people having inhuman faces, people being like essentially cyborgs is definitely weird. So it's a lot easier to sympathize with Sinclair with his loss of his family unit when they grab these prostheses or prosthetics to like replace their faces. But I was telling chat like when you insert yourself into Sinclair's shoes, when you are somebody who technically lives in this universe where prosthetics are normalized, especially when you live in a town where prosthetics are like hyped up. They are extremely normal. Like you grew up, like Sinclair grew up his entire life surrounded by people that love prosthetics, that like made it a normal part of their day to day. He is weird in this scenario, right? And I think that is kind of powerful because a lot of people can sympathize with this idea of being someone who wants to fit in desperately, right? Like Sinclair outs his family's business because he wants to fit in and like tell a story. He wants to feel some sort of connection with his friends, and that's why Cromer ends up being such a close friend with him because she immediately clocks that he is different and that they like she says they're on the same wavelength, right? And even like the Chroma relationship ends up being like a very powerful metaphor for like certain mature topics because it's probably not something I can say just like on a YouTube video very cleanly, but it's like the entire scene where Sinclair finally gives Cromer the key to his basement and they crawl through the tunnel is kind of like an allegory for like losing your first time to somebody and then trying to retract your consent for doing it and then being denied. And I think that kind of vibe is like very represented by the fact that like a lot of what Cromer says is very like charged, like very sexually charged towards Sinclair. Like she says like, "Oh, I took something precious from you. Let me see something precious again." She says like, "Oh, like that was a really good time." She has all these like markings of an abuser, and I think that makes for like a really interesting representation of the character because even her like final boss form, right? Like her upper body being unseen, so like you can only see like where her legs are supposed to be, and then let's get a mouth where her legs like kind of would open up, and there's arms coming out which aren't even like menacing. Like to me personally, I interpret the arms as like begging Sinclair for a hug, right? So it's very obvious, I guess, like if you know what that is, because again, I got like guided by a chatter for this. I would have not seen this probably ever if someone hadn't told me about this idea before I saw it. But now that I know about this idea, it's a lot more like directed. I was like, oh, like this is actually an incredible undertone for the Canto that really helps build out Sinclair's trauma and the way he responds, right? Because Sinclair, again, he was somebody who wanted to grow up, right? That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to be someone respected. He wanted to have like these things, and then he got abused, like straight up abused, and he lost all that. He wanted innocence back, right? Like the basement key represented innocence for Sinclair, and so that's why he begged Cromer for it. And then Cromer returned it and then ripped away his family and then ruined him, right? And then Demian is like this really interesting. Like I haven't read Demian, so I don't really know what the actual plotline is. But Demian being this like pseudo angel that saves Sinclair and the bus company like at the very end was like really interesting because at least from the previous Canto, like Canto 2, there's like this underlying theory that I have, or like this underlying like impression I get that I think Encore it is. I think or like Elcor Encore, whichever one that I think I can't think of her name right now, but the like antagonist from the epilogue from Canto 2, Herman, I think. Like the way they're worded seems like all of these Encore counterparts for the Limbus company bus people, like the sinners, there are counterparts that are seemingly like prepping the sinners for a harvest of negative emotions that will happen at some point during my assumed climax of the series. I'm really happy, or I'm really excited to see how this theory develops and how these people are developed as I go through the Cantos. I'll be trying to play Canto 4 at some point. I didn't realize I had an interval to go through, so I won't be able to play Canto 4 quite when I want to play it before Slay the Spire 2 comes out. But I'm very, very excited to see where everything goes. Like, this is a very interesting story. Like, this is a really good setup for the rest of the Cantos, and I really do want to play through them and like get my thoughts and have other people talk to me about them because this story has a lot of theories. Like obviously it's an ongoing story, and it's probably fun for people that know about everything to see like a newcomer talk about it. And I hope that it's like an interesting view from somebody who's going through Limbus Company for the first time, that has like some bare amount of like story, I guess, like experience from reading a lot of other books in the past. So that'll be the video. Thanks guys for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.